All right. I think I am officially live on YouTube right now. So hopefully, I think there's around 40 of you here right now, which is awesome. Thank you for joining me for our first ever YouTube live stream, where I will be coding an email from scratch. And when I say from scratch, I mean from scratch. So I'll be starting with a mockup, which we'll look at in just a minute here. And then just building it out inside of Litmus using Builder, using email previews, all that good stuff that's baked into the Litmus product. But yeah, if you have any questions throughout the live stream, you should see the live chat on YouTube. I have that open to the side here, so when you see me kind of look over, that's me checking out the chat. I saw somebody had a question in there already about hoping that I will go over media queries, which I can absolutely talk about media queries a little bit in the context of email design. But yeah, if you have any questions, then feel free to pop them in there. I'll keep an eye throughout. Other than that, I will be just kind of talking through my coding process for creating an email from scratch. I saw Aisha there calling me a brave soul. I don't know how brave I am, but I guess you all get an inside peek into how I would code something. Maybe see how rusty my coding chops are, because this isn't something I do on a daily basis anymore, even though I do spend a lot of time talking about email design. Andrew, thanks for joining me. I appreciate the kind words. I'm happy to do it. It gives me a chance to code something from scratch and walk everybody through the process. So I guess let's get started. Enough of me talking. The live stream stuff is new to me. So I'm getting used to the software that's running everything. So bear with me a little bit here. There might be a few false starts. This is the some tool I've been using for decades point, and I've been working this for a little over years now. But it's amazing to be able to see the evolution of the product. But it's all towards making email marketers' lives easier, their process, their system and email integration on emails, all that stuff baked in there. But we're really going to be focusing on using Builder right now. But I guess let's start with seeing what I'm going to be building. I have a quick little mock-up here inside of Figma. Internal, I'm really publishing some blog posts, some documents, all that kind of email design. Just went into Figma here and mocked up a really basic receipt email, nothing too fancy. You can see it's this kind of made up company that I'm calling Blobby Blobs, because I love this little blobby like visual element that we've been seeing all around the web and inside of email for a couple of years now. It's one of my favorite little design graphic elements that I've seen in the wild there. So this is for Blobby Blobs, made up company that sells blobs for people. I am seeing a couple people mentioning that it's cutting out every 20 seconds or so. I see a message saying that YouTube's trying to resolve the video feed to get it back to smooth. So hopefully it's better, or we kind of work through it. But it is being recorded anyways, so you can always watch it on YouTube after the fact. But yeah, we have a receipt email here. It has the logo. It has a little bit of introduction copy. And then it has your receipt here, which is just a table of your order, which tells you what you ordered, how much it was, what that tax happens to be, and then the total that you spent. Down below, it has a Contact Us Today CTA that allows you to reach out to customer support if there's an issue with your order, if you have questions, all that kind of stuff. And then just some footer stuff, nothing too big. It's a transactional email, so you don't have to include too much language or copy about, why you're receiving this email. It's related to that transactional event that happened on a website, wherever you happen to place that order. But pretty straightforward. No fancy like background images or anything like that. I've only, got about an hour or so to code this thing up, so I don't want to go too intense for this first live stream. But I guess a couple of things we're going to do is right from here is, I guess the first thing I would do when I'm looking at a mockup is try to identify elements that don't translate well into HTML and CSS, because those are elements that would then have to be included as images. But fortunately, most of this email will work well in HTML and CSS for our email. So the main things I want to grab are this logo up top and then the little black and white version down here below. So within Figma, I can go ahead and grab this. It's that bottom logo and say export. I'm going to export it as a transparent PNG. I've started a little folder here for any of these assets. So I'm going to call this one logo BW for black and white, save it there. For that top one, I think I already saved it out, but I think I changed a color on it, so I'm going to go ahead and export that again. Call that logo, replace the existing one. And then everything else will just be HTML and CSS to style the rest of this email, since it's largely just text, styled with some colors, and this table should be hopefully pretty straightforward. We'll see when we actually start coding it. So what I'm going to do now is jump over to Litmus proper. I'm inside of Litmus here. I have this empty folder for live coding for these live streams. Hopefully this will fill out as we do more of these, which the plan is to do at least 2 live streams via YouTube a month. So the second Friday of every month, which is today, you're joining us for the first one, is going to be some sort of practical live stream. So the first one's me live coding an email. We might go through like the design process, proofing, different design topics like interactivity, in depth into like DPI. Somebody was mentioning asking about that, or media queries, or different responsive techniques, all that kind of stuff. It'll be very hands-on, practical for email practitioners, the people that are building these emails day in and day out. The second one, which will be on the last Friday of every month, is going to be live optimization. Which hopefully a lot of people are familiar with our live optimization, which is where we get emails from the community, show them up on the screen, get a few email experts to give feedback in real time, kind of that gut level reaction to open up an email, seeing what design elements, what copy, the overall strategy, how that actually works for people, and try to give some constructive criticism. So that'll be the last Friday of every month moving forward on our YouTube channel, so feel free to subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. But we're going to be doing a lot more on YouTube this year and moving forward, so definitely subscribe. It's the best way to keep up to date on all the stuff we start publishing and our live streams. So inside of Litmus, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new email. I'm going to call this, I guess, January receipt. And I'm going to start by building it. I don't have an email here. If I had an email in like my ESP or Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that, I could say I want to test that email and import it. Similar to that, I could import my email or send it in to start the review process inside of Litmus Proof. But I don't have anything built. We're building it from scratch, so I'm going to go ahead and say build. It'll open up the template picker. I'm not going to be using a pre-built template, some of which I have loaded in here. I'm going to start with just a blank document inside of Builder, which seems a little bit scary, but we'll get to full email in the next like 45, 50 minutes or so. So this is Builder, Litmus Builder. Hopefully you're familiar with it, but it is our dedicated coding environment and visual design environment for email designers and developers and marketers. So we built this and released it a couple years ago because we weren't really satisfied with a lot of the editors that were on the market when it came to building emails. Emails are such a strange kind of subgenre, subset of design and coding that we felt we needed some dedicated features for emails for developing them. Hi everybody, I see a bunch of people joining in. Really good emails folks are here, which is awesome. Glad to have you guys here. But Builder has a bunch of tools built in for email designers that make developing emails a little bit easier. One of my favorites being things like inserting different, if you have like snippets or partials saved inside of Litmus, which for the purposes of this email we're building from scratch, so I won't be using any of those, but you can save a bunch of assets like images, colors, partials, snippets, templates inside of design library in Litmus, which makes reusing those components a lot easier. I really love the tracking feature too, because it allows you to manage your UTM parameters for your emails, because we all have to add those to track and attribute, engagement and clicks and conversions back to our email campaign. So it allows you to open that up, add your UTM parameters, pick which links you can save it to, you want them to apply to, and it'll automatically add those into your code, which is awesome. Similarly, you can add litmuses, email analytics tracking code pretty easily. The main thing people are probably familiar with or like really love using Builder for is email previews, which are built into Builder. So as you're working on your email, you can code it over here on the left panel and then pop open email previews and see how that email renders across, the almost 100 different email clients. You can choose which clients you want to preview in. And it makes that really, really fast, which is awesome. We don't have anything to preview. That's why everything's spinning right now. But as we start building it out, we'll see how this email renders inside of those different email clients. So I guess the first thing I would start with, I'm going to be coding this from scratch, but I never remember, what's that base document that we want to use inside of an email? Like, what are all the meta tags and stuff like that? I don't think anybody remembers that off the top of their head, so it's going to have, boilerplate ready. I have a GitHub repo that I have used for, workshops in the past that I keep relatively up to date that I'm going to be pulling from. I have this hybrid coding approach template, this single column hybrid email, which this is a single column email. So I'm going to be using that I'm just going to pull. So I'm going to open up the raw HTML here, copy it, and then dump it into Builder. And you should see a couple of things populated here. I do want to code as much from scratch as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of what I think is all of that content. And then we just have this blank document here with nothing in it. So I guess I can walk through a couple of things that are included in this boilerplate, just so you know what's going on here. Let me bump up the text size a little bit, and if I can remember how to do that. Just make it easier for everybody to see. So a couple of things that are going on in this boilerplate, and a lot of this is taken from a website called Good Email Code, which is a right on the nose. This is a repository of email code and techniques from Mark Robbins, who's at M_J_Robbins on Twitter. But he's kind of known as the godfather of interactive email. He's done some really, really cool work on his own at an agency called Rebel that then was acquired by Salesforce, where he is now. And if anybody's using Salesforce and using any of the interactive stuff inside of Email Studio, that's his and the rest of the Rebel team's work that you're using right there. But he's really, really smart, really talented email developer, and just developer and coder in general, and a really good hell of a musician too. If you ever want to hunt down some of his music that he makes, kind of Tom Waitsy style stuff, which is pretty cool. But he's really dedicated to creating accessible emails, which is awesome and something we should all be striving to do. And he's generous enough to share a lot of his code, a lot of his thinking on this website, which is just goodemailcode.com. I can dump that into the YouTube chat here in case anybody wants to check it out. So some of the boilerplate stuff I pull directly from here, since he has a lot of that accessibility stuff baked in. And he's nice enough to comment some of this stuff out. I think I've added some of these comments too to kind of clue people into what is going on in this code if you do start using it. But a couple of things to keep in mind. We're sending an HTML doc. So we're going to use the doc type HTML5, which is the HTML, or doc type HTML, which is the HTML5 doc type, as opposed to something like the XHTML transitional 3.0 or something like that you might see in older email templates. For accessibility purposes, we do want to include this lang attribute, which sets the language of the document on our email. Since I'm coding this in English, I set it to EN, which is English. If you're coding like Spanish, then it would be ES for Espanol. But have that in there so that anybody using some sort of assistive technology, especially screen readers, will engage the correct language profile for reading that content out to them, so you don't get any weird pronunciation issues, or it sounds normal to them regardless of what language they're actually using, and listening to from something like screen reader software. A couple other things, we're gonna set the char set to the character set, which is this meta tag, to UTF-8 to make sure that any like HTML entities or emoji or anything like that we use would display properly, because those are all specified in that UTF-8 specification. For responsive purposes, we're going to set the viewport, the width to equal the device width of whatever device we're viewing on, and then the initial scale to 1. We're not going to override scaling or anything like that because we want people to be able to zoom in if they need to, or zoom out if that's the case, to be able to consume that content easier. A couple of things we're doing here is kind of like a backup to disable the blue links that are seen in a lot of email clients, especially mobile clients. If you're including like a telephone or an email address or a date or an address, whatever that happens to be, they will default to making those blue links, which is handy from a usability feature, but not great from a design perspective because it's that like bright blue underlying link. That's the default on the web and an email. So this will disable that. And then we also have kind of another technique used down here for Apple and Gmail and Samsung to make sure they don't do any of that blue link stuff. I haven't tested recently whether or not we could get rid of this code down here, this like default reset code for the blue links, which is kind of like the older method for doing that. I haven't done any testing personally on whether or not this takes care of those, but I kind of double up just for the sake of making sure that it's as bulletproof as possible, Similar to that, we have a couple of resets for different email clients, most notably Outlook, some older Outlook clients, to make sure that they're using 100% text size. They're not adding any like space around tables or anything like that. And then similar to that for images and tables and the body of the email, we kind of get rid of any like spacing or borders or anything like that that might occur just by default styling from the web browser, from the email clients, all that stuff. And then I have some basic styles set for my text links, including a hover for those text links to add a little bit of accessibility, and then a kind of default media query baked in here that takes the kind of desktop first approach, just because that's kind of what I'm used to. I'm not doing anything super advanced that won't scale down well on mobile, so I'm not worried about making that mobile first approach, but that's a perfectly valid and a lot of times recommended approach to designing responsive emails. Again, just trying to keep an eye on like the chat and stuff. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask it there. So the media query, I did see like right off the bat, somebody had a question asking if I could discuss media queries. Happy to do that as we dig into coding this email a little bit more. But I guess for right now, just know that there is a media query up here. It's targeting any screen, so that's going to be any device that you view your email on. And it's setting the max width to 600 pixels. So any CSS we include inside of this media query will only apply when this email is viewed on a device or a viewport where it's 600 pixels or less. So that's going to be your smaller mobile devices for the most part. Then we just have the body of the email down here, which there's a couple of things going on, which are probably worth noting. Some override stuff for Gmail, which is kind of contained in the comments here. The main thing I want to note here, though, is using this div that has a couple of attributes set on it, and this is something I've learned from Mark Robbins, so thank you, Mark, for pointing me to this and helping me make more accessible emails. But we're setting a couple of things here that assistive technology, most notably screen readers, will pick up on for the content of our email. So all of our content's going to live inside of this container div. And we're setting the role, which is an RE attribute, which gives some added context to our content or whatever that element happens to be for screen readers. We're setting that to an article because that's kind of what an email is. It's like an article that gets sent to your inbox. We're saying that the role description, we're kind of describing what that article is the context of that by saying it's an email. This ARIA label will be spoken out to somebody using a screen reader when they get to this content, so we could name it whatever it happens to be. We could, so here, this is a lot of times you'll pull in like your subject line or like a heading or something like that that clearly describes what that email happens to be. So we could say something like your receipt for your recent order with, what was the name of the company that I set up? It was Blobby Blobs. Have that there, and then again, similar to HTML, we're setting the language to English, so screen readers will pick up on that and assign the appropriate voice profile. And then just kind of setting a baseline, saying the font size is 1 rem, which is a relative unit. Depending on what browser you're in or where you set it on the body or in your CSS, that value could change. But for the most part, it's 16 pixels is equal to 1 rem, which is root m. And then inside of this, we're going to add all of our content. We have a ghost table set up here, which if people aren't familiar with ghost tables, they are tables that only Microsoft Outlook will see inside of your code. So this is useful because we're using a technique called hybrid coding, which was kind of pioneered by Fabio Carnero when he was back at MailChimp. Nicole Merlin did some cool work on it. A couple different people have been building out different versions of hybrid emails. But essentially, we're using containers that are fluid by default, but then we have to constrain them for certain email clients so that they don't go like 100% wide on like a massive screen. You just can't read anything, or, you know, images and text kind of lose their context. So the way we do that with our divs is by setting the max width in our CSS to whatever that max width happens to be. In this case, it's 600 pixels, kind of an arbitrary number, but whatever, you know. And then since Microsoft Outlook clients that use the word rendering engine don't support this max width attribute on a lot of different elements like our div, we want to use tables that only they will see to constrain the size and the layout of those emails for Microsoft Outlook clients. So the way we do this is using these conditional comments that target Microsoft Outlook specifically. So in this case, it's saying if this Outlook client is greater than or equal to MSO9, which I don't remember what version of Outlook that is. It's like 2007 or 10 or something like that. Or it's in the IE rendering engine. I want you to display whatever's inside those two comments, the opening if and the end if. So in this case, we have a table that has the width attribute set to 600 pixels. It's center lined. It has this role presentation on there, which is good for accessibility purposes. And then we open up a table row and a table cell for all the content to live inside of. You just have to keep in mind when you're doing this, you're closing out that ghost table too, so it doesn't do anything funky to your rendering inside of Outlook. So we, again, have some comments here, that same targeting of Microsoft Outlook. And then we're just closing out the table cell, table row, and table itself. So inside of this ghost table, all of our content's going to live. It's going to look like this receipt email, which is pretty straightforward. And then we just close it out. So everything, in theory, will work well in all of our email clients. Most clients will support this fluid div, this container that is going to be 100% wide up to 600 pixels, and then stop there for wider screens. And then Outlook will constrain that using this kind of hidden ghost table that only it can see. One thing to note, anytime you're using tables inside of an email for layout purposes, you want to include this role attribute and set it to presentation. And that's absolutely vital for accessibility. It's one of the best things you can do when it comes to creating accessible emails, because tables are, in email at least, are used largely for presentation and layout. And that's not what they're supposed to be used for. They're supposed to be used to present tabular data. So you think of like a spreadsheet or something like that, that has, you know, a bunch of columns, a bunch of rows of some information. Uh, when a screen reader gets to that, it will read out each table row, each table column, each table cell, the table headers if they're set, the table footers, all of that information, and tell the person that's using the screen reader software where they are. So it'll say like table row, table or cell 1, here's the information. Table row 2, cell 2, here's the information. It's really, really long to actually listen to. We have up on the Litmus blog, I think we have a blog post about this. Mark has a couple of presentations where he has some audio of this actually happening. We have inside of checklists, inside of Litmus, some accessibility tools that allow you to listen your email read back to you, which is a very illuminating experience if you've never done it before. But since we're using this table for layout purposes, we want to say it's presentational by giving it this role equals presentation, and that essentially takes it out of the accessibility tree. So the screen reader software won't read it out as a table. It'll just skip through that table code and go to whatever the content inside of it is. And that's really what we want to do. It's not tabular data. That being said, this receipt information here is tabular data. It's a table of financial data. So we will be using a semantic table for that, which we'll look at in once we get to that coding there. So then after that, I just have this div where I'm setting some basic overall kind of global styles for the content within. So the color of any text is set to black, which is in a hex 0000000. I'm not going to be too picky for the sake of time about what fonts I'm using. I'm just using whatever the general sans serif is. I'm setting the font size to 18 pixels, which is a little bit bigger than the default 16 pixels. I might tune that a little bit once I start building it out. The font weight is set to normal. The line height is set to 1.8, which is pretty generous. I might, again, tweak that a little bit, kind of shrink it down, depending on what that text looks like when we start dumping it in there. The margins on this div I'm setting to 1 rem, which in this case is, again, 18 pixels. And then auto on, so the first value here is for the top and bottom, and this is for the left and right, that auto, so that's going to center our entire email for us. And then, again, we were talking about this fluid approach, this hybrid approach. We're setting the max width to 600 pixels, so divs by default will just span 100% wide of whatever element or container they're in, and then we're going to constrain that to 600 pixels so it doesn't get too wide. And then just some basic padding on either side of the left and right of the email, just 10 pixels, so the content doesn't butt up against the viewport edges as we get smaller on our displays here. So I guess let me see if there's any questions real quick. A couple of questions about like the default kind of like width of emails. Somebody's saying like, should I use 700 pixels? I use 620 pixels. It's entirely up to you and your content. You do use whatever width works best for your content itself. I'm just using 600 pixels. It's a nice round number. It's it's kind of standard like default width for a lot of emails, but look at your content. If you have multiple columns in your email and need extra room, then go higher with your default width of your email. If it's single column and you have a mostly mobile audience, you can go a little bit narrower. It doesn't really matter. So I guess that's all I'll kind of say about that. And I guess let's start actually coding something here. So the first thing I'm going to add, I'm just going to go right down the line and start coding out what these different things are. So the first thing we have is this image. I want to, let's see if I can upload those images to Litmus here inside of Builder so that we have access to them. So I have these two images, the two logos. I'm going to add those in here. So the first thing I'm going to add is the image for that the logo for it. So it's nice inside of Builder. We have access to Emmet, which is a tool for coding more quickly. So you can say things like, I want like an heading level 1 tag, and just type H1 and hit tab on your keyboard and it'll add that in there. So I just did the image tag, just wrote out image and hit tab and it auto-populated that for me. So a couple of things I want to note here. I'm actually going to get rid of that, and I want the image to be centered. So I'm going to go ahead and use this center tag. which is deprecated in HTML, but it still works in email clients, which is nice. It's just a super quick, easy way to center things inside of your email. So I'm going to do that. I usually use that just for images, special logos like this, because it works even though it's deprecated. It's a lot easier than trying to set this image to display block and using margins, because that sometimes doesn't work in certain email clients. And then I'm going to do a couple of things here. So we have the source here, which is our logo. And then we have the alt tag, which is our alternative text, which is really, really good for accessibility purposes. But I'm actually going to leave that blank right now for this logo because as far as I'm concerned, this logo is purely decoration in regards to the content of this email. It doesn't really serve a purpose other than branding on our end. So if it was something like a picture that needed descriptive alt text, then I would include that in there. But logos are by and large just purely decorational elements for branding inside of emails. So I'm going to leave that blank, which is essentially telling screen reader that this image is just there for decoration. You don't need to read it out or the contents of it out to the user. You can just kind of skip over it. But I am going to set the width on here. It's a little bit big, so maybe set it to like 100 pixels. That's a little bit more manageable. It doesn't take up as much room. I'm going to add a little bit of padding to this email too, just so it's not butting up the top of that there. And then, so that's your image. The next thing I would add is this copy, which is, it doesn't really have like a header or anything like that, so I'm just going to use a paragraph tag, which is a nice semantic element. Again, using Emmet, I can hit P, expand that with a tab, and then I guess I can go into Figma here, copy this out. Good question about images. About should I include the role equals presentation for images that are decoration, and as far as I know, my understanding is that you don't need to, because the blank alt text is essentially saying the same thing. It's just telling the screen reader that you don't have to pay attention to it. There's no alt text to speak out to somebody. So just kind of skip over it and move on to the next bit of content, which in this case, the paragraph. If you do want to include it, it's not going to hurt anything. It'll just be kind of redundant for the most part. So I'm going to use this paragraph tag for this little bit of copy. Since, as far as I'm concerned, I could use like multiple paragraphs, but this is kind of just one chunk of text. So I'm actually going to use our good friend break, the line break element here, to add a little bit of spacing between these different sentences. I'll add it after each little bit here. And you can see we're kind of getting there. We do have this link here for the check the status of your order if needed. So I'm going to grab this little check the status of your order. I'm going to close it out and hit A to expand that. I'm not really going to send it anywhere. That'll give us the link here, which again isn't really like styled that well. It's just using these default styles up here. So the same person mentioned about the role equals presentation, the empty alt tag. That checklist might recommend it, which if it does, cool. It's probably more up to date than I am. But I think ultimately it doesn't. It's going to be different for each screen reader tool that's being used. But just kind of keep an eye on it, do your testing. You should be good. So I'm going to grab the color blue I'm using for links here. And one thing I'm going to do is set it up here, but then set it in line on the link itself as well. Since some email clients will like strip out these embedded styles up here. Oh, this is a little bit funky. I think this builder just doing something weird. Grab that. So I'm going to set it up there, and then you can see we have that color there. But I'm going to set it inline as well because some email clients will strip those embedded styles out, and we want to make sure we have a different color set that's on brand for our links in case that is stripped out. So I can add it in here. Whoops. So let me grab it from up here. But I will say one thing that you'll notice is when we do that, we set it inline, then our hover status doesn't work. So we want to make sure that when you hover over it, you can still see that it's changing colors. So in this case, I'm just going to override the inline style by saying important up here for the hover state. You can see now we have that hover state back there, which is awesome. So that's like the top. That's the little intro. There's nothing too fancy. It's just a paragraph of text. We do our default styling of that text up on this container div here so that it'll just inherit through to the other elements that are included, which right now is just that paragraph tag. I am going to add in, I think I'm going to add in the footer stuff first before we move on to this table. So again, down here we have this little paragraph for the need help with your order, and then this button, which we'll add in as well. So I'm just gonna copy this paragraph, paste it down here. Builder, I will say, sometimes does some weird stuff with indents, so I'm just gonna keep an eye on it. I guess we should indent all of that so it makes sense in the overall tree there. And then get rid of all this stuff. What do we have? Need help with your order. Since that's it's bolded, I wouldn't really call that a heading, but it's kind of like emphasized text, so I'm going to use the strong tag. I'm going to indent, say strong. Need help with your order. That'll give us that styling by default in almost any email client, which is awesome. And then I have that other paragraph text. Again, this is all kind of one paragraph in my mind, so I'm just going to use those line breaks and have that in there. Shore up that space by just having the one there. So that's our kind of like footer stuff. I guess one thing we should note when we're using any semantic elements, block level elements, which are like paragraphs, divs, sections, article, heading level elements, but usually paragraphs and heading level elements are what we're going to use inside of emails. Most email clients will add, and like web browsers will add some sort of default styling to those elements, which usually comes in the form of margins around those elements. So for like paragraphs, they'll usually add in like a bottom margin so that there's spacing between paragraphs by default. The same thing for headings. For headings too, they'll add like their own sizing. They'll usually apply font style bold and change the color to black if it's not already. So we usually on email, we want to like override any of those default behaviors and control them on our end. So for most block level elements like paragraphs and headings, we would apply something like margin equals 0 to get rid of that. So I usually default to doing that. Most of my boilerplate code has that for these block level elements. You can see we lose the spacing between those two paragraphs, which is fine because we're going to slap a big div and a table in between those two things. But just keep that in mind. You usually want to override at least the margins for your paragraphs, for your headings, all that kind of stuff. So now is kind of, I guess, well, let's add the button down here, contact us today. So I'm going to add in, this is where I am going to grab a little bit of code, just so I'm not rewriting everything from scratch necessarily, because buttons can get a little bit longer to style out. But I have this CTA in my default boilerplate stuff that I have up on GitHub, which again I'll drop that into the chat in just a second here. So that gives us this button, which I'll walk through in just a second. But if anybody wants to see kind of the code that I'm pulling from, I just put it in the chat there. Feel free to check it out, open any issues via GitHub. That would be awesome. So what I did here was add in, I grabbed a whole bunch of this stuff, so let me clear out this footer code. Accidentally copy that from the old email. So I added in this anchor link, which we're calling a button. I'm gonna get rid of that class right now. We don't need it. Let's point to, I guess, litmus.com is a good place to go to. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to build buttons inside of emails. A lot of you might be familiar with bulletproof buttons, which is kind of a concept that was pioneered by a guy named Stig Morton Meyer, who works at Campaign Monitor. Campaign Monitor has this awesome generator for bulletproof buttons at buttons.cm that allows you to build out your buttons. So, you could say contact us, you could change the background color to whatever you need that to be. You can get rid of, there's an image here, get rid of that. And it'll just spit out this code. But one thing I will say is that this code that it generates for you, it works really, really well across all email clients, but it uses something called VML, which is Vector Markup Language, which is a proprietary language to Microsoft Office. And it's there to make these types of buttons work inside of Microsoft Outlook. So it's not the most flexible code. It doesn't work as well for making those buttons responsive. So people have kind of developed different approaches to creating these bulletproof buttons. The one I'm using is, again, something that I grabbed from Mark Robbins. That's why it's a Mark approved button, which is essentially doing all of your styling on the anchor tag like you would do on the web side of things. But then it's adding in, similar to our Microsoft Ghost tables, these Microsoft kind of Ghost rules, I guess. So it's adding in this little I element here with some styles set on it, and just wrapping the copy of our button in that. And all that's essentially doing is giving you a little bit of breathing room on either side of this copy so that it still looks like a button inside of Outlook. It's not shrunken down and looks like a really poorly designed box. I like this approach because it works well across a lot of email clients, but it's not as inflexible or code heavy as the bulletproof button VML type approach. So I will just kind of say that you want to keep an eye on your different button techniques, choose which one works best for you. Get rid of that. So I think this was all stuff that I accidentally got copied over. So I want to style this to make it look like the button here. So we have contact us today as the color, or as the copy. We have this color here. So I'm going to say the background color is that hex value, which is a little bit softer blue than that default blue color. The color is white. Our copy we're going to replace and say contact us today. I was using title case, so I'll kind of stick with that because I'm a fan of title case. And then a quick and easy dirty trick for again centering that is to use the center tag, put that in there, and then boom, your button centered, which is nice. Similarly, you can see we have the center line text here, so I can actually apply that using text-align and our inline CSS, and that'll center that little footer copy down there. If I wanted to add space around this thing, I could do that by just putting a div with some padding or some margins around it. Usually I would use padding because that's a little bit more robust than using margins, because Outlook doesn't like margins. But I'm not going to worry about it because I'm going to do that on the div with the table. Is going to add the padding between these different sections. So a couple of things I do want to override here is we have that the red hover kind of bleeding into this link, and we don't want that to happen. And then we also want the background color to change. So this is where I'm going to add a class of button to this button here. And then I'm going to target that up in the head of my document here, following any of these link styles. So, there's that cascade. So anything that follows is going to take precedent over these. So I'm going to say a.button. We can say color equals white, important. Let's see if that takes care of the hover. I might have to target that hover. Let's see. Nope, that's good. And then I also want to say when it's hovered, so you can use our hover states in CSS there. I want to say background, whoops. Background color is going to be, I don't know what color, let's do, I guess we'll just do black for the hover for that. And again, we're overriding in inline style, so we'll say important. And we should have a nice little hoverable button, which is awesome. There's a little bit of a spacing issue here. So this is one place where I could add some bottom margin to this paragraph to separate those things a little bit. So 0 right now is going to be the top, the right's going to be 0, the bottom, let's say like 40 pixels, see what that looks like. That's a little bit much. Let's have that to 20. So those will stay kind of in context with each other. So we have that, and then last thing for like the footer is this little like footer section, which again is very similar up here or here, where it's just like an image and then a little bit of copy. So I'm going to grab the image and this copy here, and we're just going to copy and paste that below the button and then adapt it as needed with our styles. So this logo is going to be logo BW, which is the black and white version. I'm going to make that even smaller by just adjusting the width of that on the attribute. Maybe that's a little small. Let's do like 60. That sounds good. I can add, I think I'm going to wrap this footer in its own div for kind of spacing issues. Copy that in there. So again, clean up our code. I can say style equals margin. We're going to add a top margin of, let's say like 100 pixels, something big to separate it. And then 0, 0, 0. We have a little bit of padding on the bottom. That'll give us that. And then we want to have this text centered. So we're going to say text line center. And then I mentioned earlier we have this container div that's setting our default kind of like global styles for all of this content. So that footer is going to inherit all of that CSS. So this is where we would apply inline styles to this paragraph in particular to override that, which in this case, it's going to make our text, I think it's like 888, yeah, like a medium shade of gray and a little bit smaller. I guess we should get that copy in there too. So thanks for shopping blobby blobs is this first line. Then we have copyright. So if you don't know the copyright symbol, it's ampersand copy semicolon is the HTML character entity for that to make sure that renders everywhere. So I'm going to say 2021 blobby blobs. And then we have just some made up address, which I'll just copy from here. So that's footer. So we want to change the styling of that stuff though. So we want to add the color here as an inline style and say 888, 888. Definitely shrink up that line height a little bit. So we can add line height equals maybe 1. That looks better. And then maybe on this paragraph, we want to add a little bit of spacing between that and the logo itself. So again, we can use the margin on the paragraph there. So maybe say 20 pixels, 0, 0, 0. That looks pretty good. So really the only thing that's needed now is the actual like receipt stuff, which I guess is the main part, which I gave myself like an hour to do this. We have like 13 minutes. We're probably going to go a little bit longer than an hour, but hopefully everybody's cool with that and we can kind of work through it together. So we have this kind of rounded background color section, and then this is all kind of tabular data that we're going to add in there. So what I want to do is add, similar to how we had this like stylus of this just kind of utility div, this container around the footer. We're going to do that for that content for the table too. So I'm going to make that, just copy that div. I'm going to give a little bit of padding around the top and the bottom, so we'll get rid of those. So the shorthand will give 100 pixels between the top content and the bottom, and then this is just saying the right and left is 0. We have some collapsing going on right now because there's nothing really in there. But what I want to do then is, this is all tabular data. So this is one area where I want to use tables to represent that data, to give that extra added context for especially assistive technology, things like screen readers. So this is where I'm going to use a full-on HTML table and start filling out that content. So we could say that this order number is the table header, which you can do thead. And then I'm trying to remember th is what that type of cell actually is. Oops, I put this in the wrong place in between those two. So I'll just move that. So we start filling out this table. We're going to style it after all the content's in there. We can see a T body is the table body, and then we'll have table rows and table cells for each of those different things. So essentially saying it's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different rows and then 2 columns for each of those. So I'm just going to fill that out so we can. The nice thing about Emmet, again, is we can say what we want to do in a shorthand and just expend that. So again, we had, 5 table rows, and each of those has 2 table cells. So we can do TR times 5, and then within that, we want TD times 2. I think that's the right thing. Yep, perfect. So Emmet, you can see how that just speeds things up that much more. The Emmet website, I think it's emmet.io, has a whole bunch of like documentation about what Emmet can do. It's super, super powerful. Definitely worth learning if you're coding on a regular basis. And then I can just start filling out that stuff. So I think we had 1x large blob. We're selling blobs here. That was at $49.99. $49.99. Whoops. And you can see we're starting to fill that out. We had 2 of the small blobs. And I think the total of that, they were like $12.99 each in my imagination. So that's $25.98. Oops. And then below we had the subtotal. Was $75.97. Next up would be tax, which was what, $7.60. This is the fun, tedious part of filling in content, huh? And then the total is our final line, and that is $83.57 for 3 blobs. Cool, so we have our table there. It doesn't look very fancy, but it will get us where we need to be pretty quickly here. So we want to, I guess on this div, we'll add in things like the background color, which is, let me grab what that is. It's like a really, really light shade of gray. Hopefully everybody can see it. Let's say background color is that hex value. We can add in the border radius, those rounded corners, which won't work everywhere, but where it falls back, it's just the straight corners. Not a big deal. I don't remember what it was, but let's say like 12 pixels, so it's more visible. And then we can add some padding to this div, which works pretty well across different email clients, to give that table a little bit of breathing room. So let's say like 20 pixels all around, see what that looks like. Maybe a little bit more. So that looks pretty good. That looks similar. It's close. Might add a little bit more actually. And then all that's left is styling this content inside of this table. I'm kind of curious what this looks like in our email previews. So hopefully with all of my streaming going on, it doesn't take too long. Cool, so it's looking pretty solid for the most part. Let's see what Outlook's doing, if anything. So Outlook's looking pretty good. Granted, this is 2016 on Mac, so it's using WebKit as rendering engine. Let's see what Windows 10 looks like. So Windows 10, we're losing out on some padding or some margins between these different elements, and then the background color, and just this kind of overall styling. We'll see if we can fix that in. The amount of time we have left. If not, maybe that'll be next month's live stream. Will be like troubleshooting and fixing Outlook issues. That actually could be kind of fun, so maybe I'll leave some of this hanging. But I guess for the sake of good email clients, let's fix the styling on here a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is we have some of this bold text here. I'm going to say for this order number, that is kind of like a label for the most part. So I am going to put that in this strong element. And say order number. And then close that tag out. And that'll provide that kind of styling, which looks... let's see if I pop back over here and I'll fix it. So that's interesting. So it's applying that to that whole thing. I think that might be a bug in something. Or it might be that the table head automatically makes that bold. Would make more sense. I haven't used table heads in a while, so I think that's the case. So by default, the table head, the styling on it is bold, which is cool. So we could tackle this a couple of different ways. We could apply a style of like font weight normal to the table head as an inline style, but I'm actually just going to do that as a span for this number. So I'm going to close that out and say span. Put an inline style, font weight normal, and then put that in there. And then we got that styling. That looks good. So the table body, again, we have, those are, maybe these should be bold. I kind of like drawing attention to this subtotal text and total because that's really what I think people care about. But we can do that, similar to how we did this to the span, we can do that on the table cells themselves. So I'm going to do that for, I guess we can do that for each of these here. Add style and just switch this to bold for that table cell. I'm not closing out that yet, so there we go. And then I can just copy and paste this to these other table cells. So we got there. One thing that's really missing though is this kind of spacing between the different rows in our receipt. So again, there's a couple of different ways we could tackle that. At the table level, we could very well say cell spacing is equal to like 10 pixels, something like that. We could do, let's see, one like bigger. It's not showing right there, so we're gonna not do it that way. There might be something quirky going on here. But one of the most reliable ways to, I saw Net said nope, yep, nope is right. One of the most reliable ways to add styles when you're using tables is to target the table cells. 'Cause almost every email client will respect that. So we can add that as inline styles for our table cells here as padding. So we can say padding is equal to, let's say, like 10 pixels. And that'll apply all the way around, which is fine for in this case. I'm going to copy and paste that to each of my table cells and then get rid of this font weight bold. I feel like 90% of email design development is copying and pasting for the most part. So that gives us some of that spacing. We want that for the bold sections too, so everything's uniform and consistent. So we'll copy and paste that as well. So that's looking pretty good. We'll need to add that to our table header as well. So everything lines up and looks good. You can see that this doesn't really span the full width of, that table doesn't span the full width of the div. Let's see if adding the width up here will fix that. Yes, it does. But then we also want to right align all of these cells to make it kind of justified, I guess would be the term here. So again, we can just target those cells by saying text align right. We'll add that over there. Copy and paste down to those other cells. And then the last missing element is just this kind of horizontal rule, which is just like a darker shade of that blue. Which right now we don't have any like borders, any border styling on this table, which I'm actually going to like override for sure, just make sure it doesn't add anything. Kind of by default again for tables, you want to override a lot of this default stuff that is typically applied for email clients and different web browsers. One thing I notice is that this is still one, we don't have like a second column here. So this is an instance where we could add our old friend colspan, which is column span, and make that 2. And then we might have to center align this. Whoops, left align rather. Does that work? If I can spell left, then I think it would. It does not. Close that out. Oh, that's interesting. Anybody in the comments have a quick fix for left aligning? Oh, I know why. That's in the wrong spot, isn't it? There we go. There we go. I got it. I can code, you guys. So we have it there. So the one thing we want to add, though, is that horizontal rule between like the individual itemized order and then what the subtotal, tax, and total is. So that's in between these two things. So what we could do is add a bottom border to this last table cell that's down there, and then we're probably gonna have to adjust the padding on there to make it look good. So we'll say border bottom is equal to, let's make it like 2 pixels. Solid, it's not going to be dotted or dashed or anything like that. And then I did not copy that last. Grab that. What did I just override? The padding? Oh, so that's just on that column. So we would want to do this on the table row, actually, which makes more sense. Or we could add like a horizontal rule between these two table rows. But we're going to say style. Close that out. That'll give us that, and then we would just adjust some of this padding to make it look like it's spaced properly, like in the mockup here. So we can say, we want the padding to be... I'm going to adjust all the padding because you can see it's kind of slight here, but since we're adding padding on the left and right of these table cells, this horizontal rule doesn't like align on the left or right with them. So we're going to adjust this so that the padding is just applied to the top and the bottom of those. We can say padding 0, do 10 pixels and 0 for the shorthand of each of those. Give me a second here to copy and paste like always. What am I missing? The heading. So we got that, and then for either of these rows or these table cells that are next to that border, we can just adjust that. So we can go to, you can see in like grid view here with builder, litmus builder, it's kind of nice. You can just click into those different things. So we're going to say for this small blobs, we're going to add some extra bottom border there, and say maybe like 20 pixels, and that'll add that space there. And then we want to do the same for the subtotal on the top by saying, 20 pixels, not 200 pixels, 20 pixels would be good. And then 10 pixels on the bottom, 0 on either side. Then we have it. There's a lot of space between the div and the stuff on top, so I'm going to take down those margins a little bit. Actually, I'm going to switch this to padding so that hopefully it'll work a little bit better in Outlook. So padding, I'm going to say there is... actually, I don't want to do it there. That was right. I want to add the space on these paragraphs because that'll be a little bit more reliable. So margin 0 for top, 0 for right. We're going to say, let's do 40 pixels maybe. That looks kind of nice. And then do similar, but just add that margin to the top paragraph down here, which is the need help with your order. And say 40. And And I think that's pretty close to the mock-up we had here. I'm sure it's not exact because I'm not like pulling actual values from the Figma mockup and translating that in the code itself. But I think it gets us most of the way there. Let's see what it's looking like so far. Now we're over the 3 o'clock mark, but it looks like most of you are still on, which is awesome. I appreciate it. So you can see things are looking really good in Apple Mail, which is no surprise. Apple Mail is a brilliant email client and renders things really, really well. If going to Outlook, it's looking pretty good for the most part. Again, we're having some issues with this table and this div background, which I'm not surprised for some versions of Outlook. We're even getting this, it looks like Times New Roman in that table, but I think next month we'll probably do like a troubleshooting session for the practical live stream, and we can go through this email and try to fix all these issues that we're seeing. Dark mode looks pretty good. These are the styles that are applied by Outlook. Office 365 version, dark mode. So not too bad there. Again, some stuff that we'll probably want to touch up a little bit. We can see how we do that. Mobile's interesting. So you can see everything works pretty well for the most part on mobile because we're not doing anything really fancy. But this is where, again, we can go in next time because we're running out of time here and look at how we can use that media query that we had up in the top of our email to target specific elements throughout this email and make them look a little bit better on mobile email clients. So usually that consists of shoring up space or adding space, adjusting the font size of your email so it's a little bit smaller and fits more comfortably on a smaller screen. Tables, we can adjust the padding around this overall table so it's not as squashed. Again, adjust the text size, things like that. To just make this single column email look a little bit better on those mobile clients. Let's see, what, like iPhone's not too bad. We would still want to probably add a little bit of space between the side of the email and the viewport and adjust the text size of some of these elements too. But overall, it's not too bad. It's using pretty minimal code. So if we were to look at this, it's 160 lines of code, and that includes all of our CSS and our HTML builder. I think the stream's finally catching up with me where my stuff's getting laggy. But yeah, hopefully that's like a good look at like how to kind of code something from scratch. Hopefully I was able to answer some of your questions. I'm gonna switch back over here so you and again, this will be live stream. I'd experiment with saving fade, but YouTube's kind of fun. I know a lot of you hang out on YouTube, and hopefully you will subscribe to the Litmus channel and get notifications for future live stream videos. We're going to start there. I have big plans for our image. And then I just saw that font style is missing in something. We can look at that next live stream. I think this was hopefully a good like kind of basic outline of how we would code something from scratch using that single column hybrid approach. It's not perfect. Email never is. A lot of your kind will form your so yeah, next live stream is going to be the last Friday of the month, which the date is escaping me. But we'll tweet out about that. We'll send it in our newsletter, all that good stuff. That's going to be live optimization. So we're going to be critiquing emails live via YouTube, live streaming it. We're going to get some good friends to help us out with that. People usually enjoy that. And then next month, we'll, I guess, pick up where we left off here and do a live troubleshooting session and try to figure out how we can get some of those quirks in Outlook, especially working for our email to make that template as robust as possible. So when it actually gets sent to subscribers, they're not seeing any funky stuff there. So thanks everybody. I appreciate everybody jumping in the chat. It looks like it was pretty active. I tried to keep an eye on it. I'm getting used to this live streaming stuff, so I appreciate everybody bearing with me. And thanks for the time. Hopefully this was a good kind of distraction from the chaos of 2020 bleeding into 2021. Your typical work day, give you a little Friday afternoon break. It was super fun for me. It's great seeing everybody in the chat there, and I look forward to doing many, many more of these. So definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're not already subscribed to the Litmus newsletter, just go to litmus.com/subscribe. If you want to learn more about Litmus and Builder and email previews and all that stuff, just go to litmus.com. It's the best place to do it. And you can start a free 7-day trial by going to litmus.com/pricing. So until next time, everybody have a great weekend. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you on the next live stream later this month. Cheers.